Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode at amazic.com, our podcast where we talk about all things Kubernetes and all things cloud native. I am Twain Taylor, editor at amazic.com. And if you like what you hear here, I want to invite you to head over to our website, amazic.com, where we cover a lot of stuff. We do articles, we do podcasts like this. We cover events like the upcoming KubeCon. And we have got job listings as well. So if you're interested in this space and you want to know more about what's really happening, definitely head over to amazic.com. Today, I have with me someone who is from a really cool startup called Groundcover. And I have with me the CEO and co-founder of Groundcover. His name is Shahar Azulay. Shahar, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Hey, Dwayne. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. So Shahar, if you could start with just telling us a bit about yourself and just your journey this far up to Groundcover, your background, and just what led you to the idea of Groundcover. That would be a great way to get our discussion started.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Groundcover. Groundcover has been up and running for about a year and a half, and we'll dive later into what we're doing. Before that, a lot of years in engineering leadership in one sort or another. I spent around a decade in cybersecurity from different aspects of the industry, which is a hot topic in Tel Aviv, as you know. And my few years, my last 7, 8 years before Groundcover were around applied machine learning and AI, most recently at Apple. So from a perspective of Groundcover, basically, a user of systems that monitor my production, managing teams that care about that. And in a sense, Groundcover was kind of born from experience more than, a flimps of a thought, something more deep than that. And that's why I'm here.
All right. Really cool. Wow. Great to know that you've got experience with working with Apple and doing AI there as well. So give us the short description of what the pain point that Groundcover is trying to solve and what it's trying to do different.
Basically, Groundcover is reinventing application performance monitoring for cloud-native environments focused on Kubernetes. We're trying to solve specific pain points around application monitoring that the market currently has. And what's interesting about it is it's very clear that application performance monitoring, or APM, is a value that developers, DevOps, SRE definitely understand. I mean, there's no education needed about the 3 pillars of login, metric, traces, and all that. People understand how to use it, how to debug with it. There's better and less good ways, but they're definitely they definitely know what they want, and yet most people don't have this value. That's kind of the gap Groundcover was born from. Most people use logs, custom metrics that they build on, and they don't have out-of-the-box application metrics for SLOs. They don't have full traces. They don't have a lot of the things that you would assume that over a decade past the birth of Datadog, New Relic, all the companies that basically revolutionized the APM domain, adoption is still so low. And that is where we come in. The pain points that we kind of pin to that is the onboarding time that it takes to onboard into the systems, from the hard work the R&D has to do, and basically to onboard into an APM today, you have to put it in as part of your development cycle. Developers have to change their code and work for it, and it takes time. And the other is cost, which is amazingly high for application performance solutions and unexpected. And that's a clear echo from the market that we're feeling.
All right, interesting. But application performance management, it's been around for a while, and of course, Kubernetes came along, and it's changed a bunch of things. It's made it more complex, I guess, to monitor applications because of so many moving parts, just more fragmented. But what does Groundcover bring, or what could like? So I'm thinking like there's New Relic and the others, right? The big APM vendors. they've been there for a while. They've had a head start way before, and they've of course been trying to adapt as well. So someone who's already using these tools like New Relic, Datadog, what pain points do you see them missing particularly?
So I think if you're already using these tools, most of the things that happen are around the efforts, again, that you have to do to maintain these tools, and the cost that you have to be in constant trade-off around. So I think that's very clear. People using New Relic, Datadog, and other solutions, the R&D team itself is in a trade-off all the time of what should I observe, what should I monitor. This is too much of a high of a cardinality. I don't want to store that much traces. Let's sample deeper and things like that. And basically, they always have to pre-think about what's happening with their observability stack. And we're talking about cloud native in a sense of microservice architectures, multiple platforms and languages running in production, velocity of changes in different teams, all independent on the technologies that they use. I mean, the data science team chooses that, and tomorrow you have a new service running in production. Doing that as an SRE or DevOps and keeping up with that pace, and also managing the cost of all that, that's the value that we can bring to people already using APM. That's one part. And the other part is that most of the users of Datadog, New Relic, and other solutions don't activate the APM tier. The APM world today is built in tier. You get in tiers. You get out of the box. You get infrastructure monitoring and logs. You might want to put your custom metrics there. To get all the way to application level performance monitoring, you have to do a lot of work inside the code. And so a lot of these users, and that's an adoption problem of Datadog and other companies, just don't do it with the solution. So you might be a Datadog user, but you don't have this value. Either because it's too costly or because it's just too much hard work and hard maintenance to do. So Groundcover can also integrate there. It doesn't have to be a one-by-one replacement. A lot of the times, it's just an enablement for this value. It was just too costly and too expensive from an effort perspective for you to get, and suddenly, it's available. And that's how we see it in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you talk about how, one of the obstacles to, using the APM services of these big vendors that are already been there is that it's harder to integrate, to implement them. Could you talk a bit more about that? What particularly is difficult about implementing APM in New Relic or Datadog, for example? And also about just Groundcover and the approach you guys have taken when it comes to implementing and integrating.
Yeah, I think that basically the biggest pain point is around code instrumentation, or the work you have to do inside the development cycle to implement a full application monitoring coverage. And eventually what happens is that it requires a lot of organizational coordination, which is even harder than technology sometimes, as you know. And that the reason is that, and the result is that basically companies adopt these solutions over weeks and months. That's what happens. It's not easy to adopt an APM solution, in a day. It takes coordination between the different teams, what you have to do, what's your frameworks. Sometimes it could be an agent-based solution. Sometimes it could be deep instrumentation if it's, say, a Go app or whatever. And you have to figure all that up and eventually perform that across the organization. That takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and basically a lot of organizational friction. Because the problem is it kind of drifts the decision maker. Let's say that's the DevOps or the SRE or production engineer, compared to the company. But this is the person you as a company put in charge for your SLOs and performance in production. And this person has to go through all that cycle of developers implementing that, that value over time to see that value on its own. And then, the governance of this person, of how well it actually works, it's really problematic. And I think that's what we're seeing in organizations. You can't control a clear experience of observability across the organization, and you get like pockets of different groups inside the organization using different tools, and eventually that puts a lot of load on your actual buyer, your SRE or your DevOps that want to use these tools in a critical time, and they have a lot of different fragmented results from different teams that integrated the application performance monitoring solution in different depth. And I think that's a lot of what eBPF basically and Groundcover does differently, is that suddenly these organizational barriers kind of break and things become uniform in the way you monitor. And that opens up a lot of use cases and a lot of agility inside companies around observability. And I think that's a major difference.
Wow. It almost sounds like a tug of war between developers and the ops team or the team that wants more monitoring, where the developers are tasked with setting up and sort of the code instrumentation, and then, the ops team or the SRE team, they need those metrics. And so they need the developers to do a good job with the code instrument. It is
Exactly.
quite a challenge. And so you teased your solution, which is eBPF. Which is what Groundcover uses. So could you start with the basic explanation of what is eBPF for someone who's not heard of it before?
Yeah, sure. I mean, eBPF is a really interesting story because it's a technology, on the rise really, really fast. And when we started about 2 years ago, contemplating about the idea of using it in Groundcover, it kind of clicked for us as a go-to technology that can solve all we imagined about how an APM could look. But it was very unknown compared to today. And it's amazing to see where the community has taken that. So eBPF in a nutshell, basically, is the ability to run business logic or kind of, an application code in a sense inside the kernel. That's maybe sounds scary at first, but it's the ability to kind of program the kernel in a sense, and your ability as a user to use the efficient resources the kernel can allow you to use to do stuff that you would want to do on your machine, which is not generic to all users of Linux, out there in the world. And it opens up a lot of interesting use cases in network performance and high throughput networking and how you do that, in security agents and how you monitor security, and in observability, which is clearly on the rise, maybe kind of the last pillar from this tree that is on the rise fast. So eBPF is, for us, it's the new sensor for observability. It allows you, for observability, to monitor code without being part of the code. And as I said before, even from an organizational perspective, that's a whole new ballgame. That's a completely different experience. And what's happening from a technical perspective or an onboarding perspective, that's also a very, very different experience, because suddenly, you're running 150 microservices in production in Python, Go, Node, whatever you're running, even code that is not yours, third party, open source, whatever. And you just throw an eBPF agent on top of that, and you can see everything that's going on without being part of the code, without redeploying the apps, without changing the runtime, without basically doing anything that is related to your development cycle. So eBPF is growing into observability very strongly, and we see it succeeding in a lot of different arenas, not just observability. I think it's a very promising technology, being adopted by AWS, by GCP as their, inside of their core, basically their core networking stack. So, it's super interesting to see where this technology would lead us in the next 3 to 5 years. I personally believe that, APMs and observability in general is going for that as a major sensor, as the data aggregator of most of the data you would see teams using in observability solutions.
Wow, interesting. And I find it interesting what you said about just that eBPF is able to monitor code without being part of it. And so, seems like it's very non-intrusive, and generally it can be, very lightweight monitoring solution. But I was wondering if I could ask you to make it even simpler and give us kind of an example from the real world of what would monitoring be like with the eBPF and versus the traditional before eBPF came along. What was that monitoring like? If you could give us a common example from daily life to kind of like really get this. Do you have an example like that at all?
Yeah, one I think interesting example that a lot of people relate to is legacy code. When you come to big companies, there's always that monolith that they took apart into pieces over time because they're moving to microservices and they want to freshen up their architecture. But there's always a few components that does a lot of the crunching of the original logics of the company that no one wants to touch. It's written in Java or Ruby or whatever, and no one wants to touch that fragment of production. And then it makes sense, right? Because you're saying I don't want to put R&D efforts, that it just works. But when it comes to observability, suddenly that becomes a big question. Your team wants to move to New Relic. What do you do about that service? I mean, clearly from a tracing perspective, and even from a root cause analysis perspective of flows through production, it clearly it plays a role that can explain a lot of the things that's going on, but it's kind of a dark patch inside your production because you can't instrument that code, right? You're never going to do that. Just to check the value of a new AP solution that your team is interested in. So I think what we're seeing as a clear example is that teams choose to leave blind spots, kind of manage blind spots in production. It can be that legacy code. It can be even control planes like Istio, for example. You can't see what sidecar container is doing. The traffic is flowing through that, but it's not your code. You can't really touch that. So you assume it's going to be fine. And I think that's a real cool example, perhaps, of how eBPF suddenly changes your perspective because everything is in your ownership. You don't care that that's a legacy code. You own it from an observability perspective, or that's an Istio container. You see requests going in, requests going out. You can measure the Istio latency or whatever. And I think that's maybe examples that we see a lot. A lot of different things that people chose not to cover in a sense, willingly or not. And eBPF can open up suddenly, dark spaces in production. I think that's a major value for a lot of bigger companies, perhaps.
All right. And so, what does Groundcover do on top of eBPF? How does what's Groundcover's product itself? So considering it's based on eBPF, I'm sure there's some cool stuff that you built on top of it as well. Could you talk a bit about that layer?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, eBPF is a really raw technology eventually. I mean, we're totally believers in the community, and in a couple of years, I want to assume that eBPF is going to be a commodity tool for a lot of developers in their toolbox, ad hoc toolbox or whatever. But it's currently very raw. So Groundcover is kind of leading the observability space in what you can do with eBPF. So it's clearly not a commodity for every developer team, but on top of that, I think that's the catch for us. We're trying to break the pricing models of observability solutions. So a lot of the things that we do is not just say eBPF is a sensor, just take all this data, which is even more data than you had before, and just observe it all. But we have a layer running inside our agent that does a lot of the data crunching and insight deduction through the agent as data flows by. And it allows us, for example, to create metrics in high cardinality inside the agent on the fly without necessarily storing the data or shipping it outside of the cluster. And that allows us to create a very interesting cloud native architecture of sampling data at really high rates without you having to configure sampling rates or all these different things, storing it inside your data, inside your cloud, so it can be private, so we don't have access to this data. So it's not just eBPF for us, it's eBPF as a sensor to get you into the system, cover your entire production all the time, get you that 60-second onboarding, as eBPF promises, and then make it scalable, make it worthwhile, make the insights you want to get predictable in pricing, so you don't have to be concerned about a Black Friday peak in your APIs that will jump your bill. And that's kind of what we're trying to do as a company, as a technology, to also reinvent the way that data is handled in an APM. I think security, for example, the security domain has been doing it for a few years, and I think that's an interesting comparison in a sense that EDRs or solutions like that have evolved from agents sampling a lot of events, sending them to a backend that kind of tries to make an insight of a security incident. And over time, it was clear that as data volumes go up, you have to do something more intelligent inside where the data is, inside the agent itself. And I think we're trying to bring that to observability regardless of eBPF. I mean, clearly it works great with eBPF, but even if we would have gotten the data from somewhere else, it's an important layer of Groundcover.
All right. Did you say onboarding in 60 seconds?
Yeah.
Wow,
I think
okay.
that
That's super fast.
I know it sounds weird, but I think that's the wow factor of first of all eBPF, but Groundcover in a sense. I mean, people don't expect to get that depth of observability and that coverage in that time, but that's what we're trying to do as a company, as a compass. We're trying to bring out of the box value without any configurations or you thinking what you have to do to connect some integrations into the product, completely self-contained. Yeah, in a minute installation. That's basically what happens.
That's amazing. That's super fast. What are some of the early aha moments that some of your customers see after the 60 seconds of onboarding, probably on the first day or the first few days? What are some of the responses that you've gotten from customers? Could you share some of those examples?
Yeah, I think that we get into a lot of customers that, we're trying to be modest. I mean, people have been doing fine without us. I mean, everybody finds a way to build their own observability stack and they get by, right? I mean, we all do that. There's a million different solutions and you find a way to get by. And I think most of the aha moments that we feel is that suddenly teams feel like they can suddenly investigate things that have been bugging them in a sense, but are not critical bugs that, critical bugs are easiest to solve. So they have been using logs and metrics and they have their own metrics that they build and so on, but suddenly you kind of light the switch and there's so much more data, so much more matrix, so much deeper cardinality, samples of raw APIs and traces to the system. And I think that's where we start to see them kind of, okay, I think I can now understand why we're getting these glitches in, something that they have been throwing to their backlog. And that's a great aha moment for us to see that this data, although they could have, they could have been okay. They're not. It's not like we're the only solution out there, but it's suddenly a depth of data that allows them to do stuff much faster, much deeper inside their production. I think that's the aha moment for us to see that this data has been super valuable, although some teams just don't have it. And I think that's the cool part about what we do.
Yeah, sounds really cool. And I think, if a product can actually solve your problems that you came to solve, but also show you a bunch of other stuff that's been nagging you for a while and you didn't even think you could fix, I think, that's saying something, so quite impressive, that itself. And I just want to ask about how does this work as it scales? Since you're saying there's a lot of cardinality, there's a lot of granularity in the monitoring data. As the system scale, there's probably a lot of monitoring data sitting somewhere. Where does this sit when it scales? Does it scale, and is performance impacted at all? How does that work in terms of just under the hood?
So first of all, that's kind of our mission. We're trying, everything we do is built to run in scale. We have a few kind of lead points on that, or benefits that we can have. One is that eBPF is super efficient, so a lot of the work is done inside eBPF. So from a memory, CPU, usage perspective, we're always trying to improve. But it's definitely a very interesting way to reduce resources to get the same, maybe a much better observability coverage, in a sense that you can see huge volumes of data, crunch them and still do it in a reasonable resource. It's also measurable, which I think that's a really cool thing about it being able to scale. You can measure what the agent is taking. It's from a Kubernetes perspective, it's an entity that you can measure, as opposed to standard IPMs when they run part of your applications. You can't really decide A/B testing. You can know how much is that CPU spike because of the observability code patch that is running currently inside my application, or is it my application to blame? So that's one part, and we're definitely working on the agent being super efficient. And the other part is the data aggregation itself. Basically, metrics are created inside the agent, so we're saving on tons of networking and trafficking of data, which reduces a lot of CPU and basically serialization of data that also saves a lot of performance issues. And everything is stored inside the cloud. So we choose when to actually sample raw data, like traces, based on events that the agent determines that are relevant. So we will get tons of matrix and things, in really high granularity about what's going on inside the system. But we will sample deep raw events when it's necessary. So the experience is you have all the richness of the data, but you don't have to decide on half a percent of production is being sampled, but you actually sampled the 0.5% that you care about. So we kind of create a collage of all the information in production. Regarding scalability, we use the best technologies that are available to store it in your cloud. So we use data sets, data storages in your cloud that store the metrics, logs, and traces. So we don't even have access to that. That allows you, together with our help, of course, control the manageability of that in a sense that it's now cloud native. You can scale that database to do whatever you need. And once if you think you need more cardinality, you can just get it. And it's not directly determined by price or by, kind of pricing plan that you're currently on, but mostly on your decision of whether to allocate, say, storage for that. And I think that's kind of the equation we're trying to build. We're trying to say we know how to create all the cardinality that you need, and we have all the smart mechanisms to reduce 99% of the noise before it even gets to you. But then we have customers that want to save our really high cardinality for a month, and some that wants to save it for 3 days, and that's up to you. It's in your cloud, and you can decide how much faster you want your queries to work on that, and how much data retention you want. And we see customers playing with that all the time.
All right. Interesting. And so when it comes to pricing, right, you already mentioned how, that pricing is one of the issues with the traditional APM vendors. And you also mentioned that Groundcover is figured out and is constantly improving ways to reduce the amount of data needed and find better ways to store and analyze all of that stuff. So I was wanting for you to give us an idea of just the kind of pricing improvements that your customers have seen when they come from a traditional APM vendor, to Groundcover. Give us a ballpark percentage of the kind of cost reduction that they see in their with Groundcover.
Yeah, so Groundcover is basically the entire pricing model is built on a very predictive pricing model, price per node, which is again very Kubernetes native compared to kind of the per host, a bit more vague pricing, but it's still a very close pricing model to what you would expect from, say, infrastructure monitoring. You have X amount of hosts, you pay for that every month, and if you scale your Kubernetes clusters, clearly the cost would scale, but that's something you predict much more than traffic peaks or cardinality and things like that. So that's the first thing we do. So pricing is totally predictable and kind of flat per node, and we see pricing reductions of sometimes over than 10x, which is not because we're cheaper in a sense that we reduce our margin, but just because I think we're doing things a bit differently and a bit smarter in some areas, or even more opinionated in a sense. I think we can say that if some of the things we do, some of the data we sample, some of the reduction that we do is opinionated. We try to think what would interest you when you're trying to look to production and troubleshooting. So it allows us to create that gap, with technology and with kind of a product orientation. But we see companies, small to medium companies pay over $1 million a year per Datadog. So we're definitely getting into 10x improvements in these areas and cutting costs dramatically. Also allowing them to enjoy all that in one tier. I think that's maybe something regarding the pricing model that we should mention. You're used to paying even the prices in tiers. You pay for your logs differently and your metrics differently, and your infrastructure monitoring differently, and so on. And when we say a flat price per node, that's all these domains, all these verticals included in this price. And I think that's super interesting for companies that are used to using all these calculators and figuring out what exactly should they aim for. We're trying to simplify that.
Yeah, it always starts out as a very small amount on the pricing page, and then when you calculate it, it ends up quite a sizable chunk.
Like solving the enigma sometimes, you have a million different...
Yeah, it gets really complex. And, I was wanting to ask about just how, just some use cases of how Groundcover is also used alongside these other APM tools and generally monitoring tools, because, it is very fragmented today, and that even within a company, different teams want to have their own choices with tools, and so it is a fragmented world. Do you see some use cases as well for Groundcover being used for particular purposes, and some of the traditional tools being used for other purposes where maybe Groundcover may not be the best suited? Do you see any of those use cases?
Yes, so I think we want to see ourselves as kind of the Kubernetes APM that is Kubernetes native, that brings you all your APM value inside Kubernetes. But I mean, most teams in the world don't pay a vendor like Datadog on New Relic, but they work on open source stacks like Prometheus, Grafana, and all the different additions around that. I mean, Grafana is clearly one of the most prominent tools in the world. So a lot of the things we see ourselves integrating with is Grafana. Grafana is even integrated into the Groundcover product in a sense inside our dashboarding system. And everything that we collect, for example, all the metrics that we collect are a Prometheus data source, because if we're storing them in your cloud, what we're trying to say is it's yours. You should be able to use it whatever you like. So we have a lot of teams installing Groundcover, using the UI to, what is an APM rather than a UI that puts matrix logs and traces together in a sense that allows you to troubleshoot. So uses the UI, but they still have their dashboards, and their custom metrics and the things that they work for, which is great and they should keep. And we're trying to say, just use that also in your Grafana and enrich that suddenly with, tons of new metrics of, application level metrics, basically. But still stay in your Prometheus stack, Grafana stack, which is a very common integration. I think other tools perhaps are more head-to-head in a sense that you either get the experience from us, and it wouldn't make that sense. Even kind of Kubernetes infrastructure layer monitoring tools, we're providing that inside the platform, but other than that, teams work a lot on their logging backends and on their custom metrics backends and dashboarding. So we're definitely trying to see how we can work with that and not just claim that we have a magical solution that we take all the work they did for them. So that's a very common integration.
All right. How does someone get to try out Groundcover? Do you have like a free trial or something?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, I didn't just say a 60-second integration and then ask people to see a demo. It would be not nice. So yeah, we're completely self-served. The product is installed by one command line. You can see it literally on the top of our website. So you can just go into groundcover.com. You can see the command. There's a docs clear that explain everything that we're doing. Take the command, run it. It will install it on your cluster in 60 seconds, and you just go into app.groundcover.com and start seeing data flowing in without doing anything. It's a free tier. It's a very generous free tier because we again believe differently in how to price for data. So we're not limiting by time and also not by features. So you can install it on any Kubernetes cluster at any size and try it out. Actually see the value, and I think that's the best way to figure out if eBPF is for you, if Groundcover is for you. I think people need to feel it in their own hands. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, last question I have is there anything new that needs to be learned to use Groundcover to its full potential? Like, does someone need to know about eBPF or other particular command line scripts or commands that need to be learned for using Groundcover, or is it like you set it and you're good to go?
Basically, you set it and you're good to go. I mean, talking about eBPF is super cool, and I'm always willing to do that. But we don't even want you to know that's eBPF in a sense running underneath. You shouldn't care in a sense that's what's going on. So definitely not anything to do with eBPF. And I think we're also trying to help users that are not that proficient with Kubernetes in a sense of saying we're gonna help a lot with that. So even teams that are not that proficient with their Kubernetes deployments, I think Groundcover can help there as well. So you don't have to be a Kubernetes whiz to install Groundcover and start using it in your production. And I think there's a lot of teams that are somewhere in the middle. I mean, they know how to use it, they know how to deploy it, but perhaps they're too scared to start thinking around with every little thing inside Kubernetes. So that's also important to kind of say that there's nothing very customized here.
All right. Thanks so much for just giving us really detailed and really informative responses to all of those questions, Shahar. It was a great conversation. Before you go, though, I have a couple of questions to get to know you a little better. So here goes. I asked this one to all of the guests on the show, and it's one I really like to hear about. Your alternate career path, if not for your job in tech.
For me, it's actually to be a cook. I've been doing it for
Oh,
even professionally for a while in my
wow.
very long past. So yeah, that would be that.
All right. So what do you cook? I mean, which are your trademark, your signature
I
dish?
mean, right now there's the CEO, not too much.
Okay.
Cook to survive, but before that, a lot of different things.
I mean, what were you known for? Any particular dish that your friends know you for?
Mainly pasta dishes and things like that.
Ah, neat. Okay. Wow. So the moment that you knew you were going to be a programmer or in the tech space.
I think I didn't really know. I mean, I was under the impression that I wanted to learn physics, so I kind of learned engineering together with physics, and as it kind of evolved, I understand engineering. For me, engineering was much more interesting than physics, so it kind of happened. If you would ask me 20 years ago, that wouldn't be my answer. So
All right.
I didn't really know.
Okay. Yeah, so you guys work on some open source project as well. You've released some of your own. So yeah, I want to ask about, complete the sentence. Open source is, what would you say it is?
For me, open source is both amazing and confusing. I think that
Okay.
one is amazing because it's amazing. The most amazing project in the world, I think, are open source. The power of what people can do in these communities is so much more powerful from an engineering perspective than any commercial company almost. Confusing because I think it's still confusion in the industry of open source as a monetization kind of path, and open source as a tool to build and progress with the community around values that you want to build. I think we still mix that up. So as part of the industry, I think that's also a bit confusing sometimes for me, but amazing in most
Yeah.
cases.
That is a hot topic. I mean, not for the huge the tech companies, but then the mid to small startups definitely have that dilemma. So yeah, just being CEO, want to ask the best and the worst part about being CEO.
Yeah, no, I think that the best and the worst part come together in the sense that you either get to celebrate some small victory with yourself, or you have to take all the responsibility for the failure. So that's the plus and the minus together. That's
Right.
the perfect equilibrium in a sense.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Your last question, Shahar. Your favorite source for what's happening, new and happening in tech? Where do you go to get your latest updates?
Yeah, so I think besides Reddit and the other kind of standard channels, I think that most of my best updates come from actually LinkedIn and Twitter, and I think that's maybe on me, but there's so much going on there, so that I use that most of the time to figure out what's happening.
All right. Yeah, it is a fire hose there. Great. So yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. I enjoyed talking to you, Shahar. So yeah, thanks so much for the time. And for those of you watching, if this sounds interesting and you want to check out Groundcover and what it's capable of, definitely head over to their website. And Shahar promises a really quick onboarding. So even if it's a trial, you're going to see results in, I guess, minutes or hours. Minutes. So definitely head over. So definitely head over to the website and give it a shot, give it a try, see what it's capable of. And I think you'd really know very quickly if this is for you or not. So with that, we come to the end of another insightful episode here at amazic.com. Do join us again for another like this. With that, it's me, Twain, and Shahar signing off. Thank you.